Justify. Prove to be right or reasonable. Justification is at the heart of all legal and political argument. But at a time when argument itself is slave to appearances, it is time to bring back a culture of justification. Justify, a podcast on law and politics in India from the Vidhi Center for Legal Policy, hosted by Arghya Sengupta.
Welcome to Justify. As India prepares to go to the polls, this season is dedicated to examining issues of law and policy which shape our nation. Hello and welcome to our listeners. We kicked off this new season of Justify in a critical election year. Today, we take up the third rail of Indian politics for at least the last 3 decades: reservations, caste based as well as those based on economic criteria. But we hope that our conversation today, unlike much of the political back and forth on this issue, will generate more light than heat. I'm delighted to welcome Juhie Singh, who's the national spokesperson of the Samajwadi Party and national president of its women's wing. She was the chairperson of the Uttar Pradesh State Commission for Protection of Child Rights, and she's also an entrepreneur in the floriculture and horticulture sector and advocates for women's rights for political participation by participating in it herself. She studied for the Bachelor of Commerce at the University of Allahabad and subsequently went on to a public policy and management degree from the University of London. Ms. Juhie Singh, thank you very much for coming on Justify.
Thank you so much for letting me share this platform with you.
No, so you have been, let me start directly. You have been on ground in Uttar Pradesh as a political leader and also have a master's in public policy.
Yeah.
So, how do you see policy issues pertaining to reservations, which has been an endemic feature of politics and elections, certainly in in all elections in independent India? So, how do you see policy issues pertaining to reservations having electoral salience?
Uh, belonging to UP, I mean, you would say the Hindi heartland, where I would put UP and Bihar almost in the same box. There is huge unemployment, or let's say very disguised unemployment, even if their family is working. And for us, historically, employment for us or for the Hindi heartland has meant government jobs. Whether it's, I'm not just saying it's the IAS or the state services, it's also universities, it's also government institutions. So that's where the hunger for getting a secure job, security is another consideration. And reservations cater to the aspirations of the people who have not been able to access this entire platform of government security since the very beginning. There are people, especially in villages, there are, I would say, urban centers still, the paradigm shift is taking place. We do look for private jobs. There are people migrating, going out of UP. But generally, the first preference, whenever I would see it in doctors also, where, of course, private practices may be more lucrative, but the castes we talk about, who, apart from economic empowerment, I think also what matters to them is the security which the government job gets. So, reservation becomes a very important part of every policy implementation and also policy interventions, whether it is formal or informal. That's how we see it. And as an electoral platform, I think any government which tries to woo the people would talk about reservations, would say that we would give reservations as a shift when we came up with as a Samajwadi Party in 2022. Apart from caste-based reservations, we did talk about 33% reservations for women in government jobs, which is what we wanted to implement if we were in power. But I would say reservation as a caste-based catering to people's needs exists, and it is something which we will have to pencil in realistically in all policy interventions.
No, I think that's a very realistic note you strike, because this lure of a sarkari naukri
Yes,
is still significant in people's minds, not just in the Hindi heartland, but I think across the country. And as you rightly pointed out, it's not just the fact of a government job, but the security that it brings, which is of great economic consequence. But the reality also is that the pool of government jobs has been steadily shrinking as the role of the government itself in people's lives has been reducing
yes,
significantly. Whereas earlier, at some point of time, all schools were state schools. Now
yes.
state schools for uh, in some states actually a minority percentage of schools that exist, with the mushrooming of low cost private schools. The same goes for hospitals and other healthcare facilities. So do you see this continuing, given the fact that government jobs themselves are reducing? Do you see this demand, as we have seen in several states like Haryana, also transpiring into the private sector, that there should be reservations now in the private sector? How do you see the trajectory of reservations given the diminishing pool of the role of the government, particularly in employment opportunity creation?
So, first of all, yes, I would say that the when we talk of caste-based reservations, definitely I would say the ability level of people. I mean, I'm talking of historically injustice which has been done to various castes, which are not what we call forward castes as such. Their level of uh, ability has risen. Sometimes it is higher than what we talk of upper caste. Secondly, you are talking of health. The role of the government, of course, is becoming lesser, but it is the government which caters to the health sector and the aspiration for education, especially where we want to take it to the last frontier, that is the really poor people, the economic weakly weaker sections. And it's theoretically we can say that the economically weaker sections may include forward castes, but here I would say that caste and class very much overlap each other.
That's right.
And the people who are deprived of proper health facilities, who cannot afford to go to private hospitals, that's where the government role can never go away, although we are decreasing the budget and we are not equipping our government hospitals with enough human resources. I would say hardware can still come, but you do need those human resources to operate them. Then again, I would just put it as a personal example, or who voted for Samajwadi Party. We talked about the old pension scheme. Again, the flag of security comes in. And when we talked about bringing back the old pension scheme, irrespective of what the economic parameters or discussions or the caveats would be, but people, not just what we would say in the government job, the class A people, but there are others who voted for it because they wanted that security.
Could
If
you tell
I'm
us a little bit in detail about what this old pension scheme
So
was about?
old pension was that if you retire, then the government does give you something equivalent to your salary for your lifetime and till your lifetime, right? And also, if you have a dependent as a wife, it continues.
Right.
So
What is
I
the new
think
pension scheme?
new pension scheme, I think that the government still takes away it a certain amount from your salary, invests it in the market, and then
Right.
if you choose to retire, which again now the retirement, probably earlier you could opt out of a government job after 15, or I would not know the exact 18 years or something. Then is when you would get pension for lifetime. And before that, if you choose to go for another option, then the old pension would not apply. But
Right.
now that's not there. So in a way it's liberating, because the young man who's got a government job finds another opportunity. He doesn't really have that mental block that I need to complete 18 years or 15 years to exit. I'm planning my exit route earlier. But for a certain generation of people who have for whom the legitimacy is being in the government job, any government job, for them it becomes more of an identification that I worked for the government till about like 60 years. The government should look after him or her. So again, I would say there are pros and cons of both sides. It's also a mindset. How,
Absolutely.
as you said, that in Haryana there are other places where they're talking of reservations in private jobs. Governments are talking of it. So, talking about it, even bringing about a law in that part does not really confirm to the fact that you will be able to implement it, right? Just like we have seats, we have reserved seats in, let's say, IIMs. We have about, in the UP government, if you calculate, even we have about 40 lakh vacancies of various segments of jobs.
That's right.
But again, we don't want to, the government has to go to this procedure of creating these jobs and, getting the recruitment. But they find it more convenient just outsourcing it, which probably is a contractual sort of a thing, which is another thing which somebody will have to take a decision, because we outsource, there is no security. Also, we are doing it with private companies. There is always a dissatisfaction after a time.
That's
So
right.
these are all points which are there, especially in a state like UP and Bihar, where salary levels are not very high. The
That's right.
conditions of working are not very, I would say, conducive to people. So
That's right. And
yeah.
as you said that there are pros and cons to
Yes,
every issue, and this is a mindset. As in, this is a mindset that certainly wants a government job, and also reservations has been seen as a part and parcel
yes,
of employment politics in India. So much to the extent that of late we have seen that even so-called non-backward castes, like
yes,
politically powerful castes. I mean, at
yes,
least non-backward politically, like you say, the Jats or the
yes,
Marathas in Maharashtra.
yes.
They have been, and Marathas have constantly been angling for reservation in government jobs. So, in your view, given as you said that we think of reservations in some sense as a form of social justice, as a form of
Yes,
reparation for untouchability, that was the core basis for it right at the very outset of people who were excluded. But
yes.
now, when this mindset is permeating in such a way that powerful landed castes are looking for reservations, how do you see that develop?
So again, a politically empowered and landed caste again would not really, I would not identify it wholly with a economically empowered and a socially relevant
That's right.
caste. Yeah. So from political empowerment or influencing people or influencing the government formations would not really for me would not really translate just automatically into economic empowerment or social legitimacy. Politics is also, or government jobs for, I would say, for many of these landed castes, but it also becomes a platform of for us it is social justice, because we are taking it to people who are not a part of that particular circle. For them it is also a social legitimacy and social empowerment. We go to places in UP, I would say, we've been campaigning and go to new places where I've seen forward castes, and in UP, when there you would say Jats and Marathas, in UP you would say Thakurs and Brahmins, the two dominant castes, huge land holdings. But again, the fact that is holding that, that ownership of that holding is also sometimes a responsibility, because by cultivating it, by doing the traditional form of occupation, doesn't mean that you are getting a monetary benefit of it. You might be still powerfully dominant because there are people living on your land, or they've been working with you. You've had those sort of feudal relations, with different communities. But then Adar also seeks that maybe there are two children of the family who are seeking a government job, which reservation to that particular community. And here I'm just when I think talking to you, it's not really just the Thakurs and Brahmins. We have the new emerging backwards in the scheduled castes who are equally dominant. And for them,
That's
that
right.
political and government aspiration is huge to have that security, to have that government recognition. So it's a very, I would say, a situation which is not very, it doesn't have to it's not dichotomous, that you can,
Yeah.
yeah, it's not a black and white thing.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
but
Mm.
and I think that this is interesting, and I would like you to kind of elaborate on this a little bit further because, of course, as a constitutional lawyer, the Modi government passed the constitutional
Yes.
amendment, which now makes reservation on the basis of economic criteria also a 10% horizontal reservation
Yes.
across categories that is technically available not just to forward caste. Of course, it's
Yes.
been called by the media as an upper caste reservation, but also available to Muslims as well as available
Mm.
to Christians and others who do not have the benefit of reservation at this point of time. And
Mm.
so in your view, though it's not dichotomous, do you see the idea of reservation based on economic factors? Because given the fact that someone who's a large landholder,
Mm.
may have some amount of social standing, but that may not necessarily translate
Yeah.
into economic performance. But do you see reservation on the basis of economic factors as a way forward for the reservation trajectory in India?
So again, caste is a reality we live with in India. And again, I would say that the the economic situation of a caste, if you belong to a particular caste, or if you see the over the past, let's say 100 years also, I'm not taking it to 200 years, has been something that certain castes have been marginalized by certain other castes. So the argument, which is not mine only, which comes from the ground when I talk to them about economic, giving reservations to economic weaker sections, it is identified in the minds of the people as a forward caste reservation, irrespective of the fact that yes, even in Muslims there are forward castes, right? As you said, it's not they have their own caste system. But then somebody from the backward caste or the scheduled caste or the scheduled tribes would say that I'm not taking away your reservation. I'm not protesting that why give 10%, but you give me my right because that's the only way I can climb up that ladder.
That's
So if I'm not protesting against you, I'm not saying that you are just don't take away something which is mine by right of the constitution, because I still deserve it and I still want it, and my situation or people around me in my community, the situation is such that we need it. In a place like UP, like in Bihar also, we were talking about it yesterday, we have the Musar community, right?
yeah.
Totally, we've been to them, to their villages. They are still living in some sort of a social silo. People go there. There are government schools which are around, but to take those children to government schools and to just bring up to them to the level of the literacy, which will at least help them to compete or allow them. Help is such a word that judgmental word, to even allow them to compete on the same platform as I would, even if I was studying in a government school, right? Would take that extra mile. And similarly is the case with I would say government reservation. When we talk of reservations, then I would not just put myself in reservations in jobs. Every policy we make, because this is about policy making and innovation. So every policy, at least in Samajwadi Party, which we make, and I would say even with the present government when they make, there is always some sort of informal tinkering of the policy, that these are the labharthis at the government say, or these are the beneficiaries where this policy intervention must reach first.
That's right.
And it's done on a regular basis. So bringing, I think we'll talk about the caste census next. So I would say that is a reality, and what is the way forward is to address that reality, to acknowledge it is, and then maybe together we can find a way. Yeah.
That's right. And of
Yeah.
course, we have to create more jobs. We have to ensure
Yes.
that at the end of the
Mm.
day, that pool is also becoming wider, and not just
Yes.
that we are splitting up that pool into smaller and smaller pieces,
Yes.
because that way, that piece
Yes.
will run out. But let me turn to Uttar Pradesh specifically. Uttar Pradesh was always known as as heavily stratified, both caste wise as well as politically, and it was said that the Samajwadi Party is the party of the Yadavs, when Mayawati was a more
Yeah.
dominant force. Mayawati was the party of the Dalit and the Bahujans, and the BJP has traditionally been seen as an upper
Yes.
caste party. Uh, how true do you think this kind of stratification is at this point of time leading into the general election?
So let's talk about the Samajwadi Party. Yes, of course, every party has a caste class which supports it. And whether it is the BSP, they had a certain caste or class of people whose aspirations initially BJP would only be able to address. We had a caste and class combination which we would be able to address. And when we talk of the BJP, then earlier, I mean, I have seen the BJP when it was not strong in UP. Then I would say not just it was not just a forward cast party; it was a very urban oriented party. The mindset of people who are urban, who probably would not need the basic necessities, because the analysis of people being sent into assemblies will always tell you that what is the caste which is represented by this party. And I would say most Thakurs, if the BJP would run through their calendar, Thakurs who have gone from Samajwadi Party. And they are not Thakurs whom I would say that there are, I mean, there are economically weaker sections also of a caste. That also implies to Brahmins. Whether it was the BJP or the BSP also did this. The
That's
BSP,
right.
when it formed its government, if you see, at a time, I'm not too sure about the BSP number, but at a time, I remember we had about 39 to 42 Thakur MLAs and about 30 Brahmin MLAs at the same time at a particular government that was for the SP. Now the BJP stake has an equal amount, right? So what has emerged now is the filling up of the political space by the already empowered people. And when I say people, then it's not just a particular caste. It may be anyone. So the BJP has changed the game in such a way. I mean, I hear people, I would say the cadre was really developed by the BSP, which has come to us. And there are stories which I hear that how they started their party was that, including then we come to Netaji, that it wasn't money. I mean, they would just go, they wanted to hold a meeting, they would spend, spread around a
That's
sheet,
right.
and people would put money on that. And that's how they would proceed. And that's how the Samajwadi Party cadre started. But 2012 was something when we tried to change the picture, when Akhilesh came to power. So that was one time when he was young, he got candidates. He said no to candidates who had criminal records. And there were people who were not given tickets, and we formed the government. Lucknow, which is known as the stronghold of the BJP, we won almost except one seat, we won everything in Lucknow. So yeah, the times which are changing. So and the first time voters, I think the young voters, the women voters are two vote banks who, at least the first time voters are not very reverent about anything. It appeals to them. They listen to you. It's not as if they have a mindset. Yeah.
That's right. So let's, on that note, turn to women's reservation. Now, this
Yeah.
has, of course, been an issue that you have
Yeah.
worked on quite closely and is close to your heart. And again, the Modi government has announced in slightly complex fashion that there will be 33% reservation for women in legislatures and parliament. But this is only going to be after the delimitation exercise, which is going to be after the census. So we are not exactly sure when that will happen, because this last census has not happened, but presumably it will happen in the foreseeable future. Now, how, as a woman, because I've heard both points of view on
Mm.
this one, how as a woman do you see women's reservation, particularly in legislatures and also in jobs? Do you see this as empowerment, or do you see it as tokenism?
So, I would say it's an issue which was festering. It's been addressed. It's not a reality at the moment, but at least the passing of this bill puts a pressure on all parties to acknowledge that women should be given a place in the legislature, in the parliament, right? And how it translates into reality is still out in the open, because not many people are still the winnability factor. There are other factors. There are facts that some man might have, nursed his constituency for longer, so he might be the favorite candidate. All those things are there. But I would also say that if they've got in this women reservation, then all parties should address this issue and give a certain percentage of seats to people in every election, which is happening. I mean, the list, when it goes out, I can see that, yes, some mind has been applied that every list should have some women. Uh, our stance was always the same. It's also very similar to what we talk about caste census and other things, that for a woman who is, let's say, who has a level of education, who comes from a certain background, not just a certain caste, it's easier to make place in the political arena. But for a really marginalized person, for a woman who is from the village, who has probably not really come into the political arena at all, and for them to reach the parliament is what the dream of democracy is. That requires a certain hand holding. It requires a certain mentoring process. It also requires from those communities to take out women who would give that time, because again they have a time constraint also, which we have to address, because many of them are also breadwinners. So to make them give that time in the political arena and to fight for that. So we always said that either if you announce the reservations, let us reserve a certain number of tickets for women. We want women from the backward communities, from scheduled castes, from scheduled tribes, even Muslims and Jains, Christians to get a priority. So maybe a quota that if you are fixing this much should be given to women from these communities to for a certain time, which I think has happened in when we have put Panchayati Raj in place also in
That's right.
UP. So
That's
it's
right.
in operation also, which I don't think that the policymakers want to address at the moment, because then it also opens a Pandora's box.
Absolutely, and maybe it's too close to this election to have done it. But in your experience with the Panchayati Raj institutions and women's reservation there, how has it operated?
It's changed. I've been witnessing it, and when I did my masters was the time when I've given a job. I've given a gap between my bachelor's and before I went to do my public policy and management and decentralization in India was a part of my dissertation. So the first time a woman went to that place of Pradhan or Jila Panchayat Sadasya, she was still, asking her husband, or it was more Pradhan Pati and acha inke husband aayenge, he will occupy that position. Now I've seen that the second time or the third time, if she occupies that place, then she's very well aware of her rights, and uh, not just rights, that woman is equipped, either she'll get someone, all the policies of the government which have been made, they download it, they take it, cater to the people who have voted for them, and they try to translate it into reality. So it's changing and it's changing fast.
That's right. So there might be some tokenism at the edges, but I think there is some real empowerment that
Yes,
the Panchayati Raj reservation for women has shown, and maybe the same will happen once women's reservation in Parliament is also made
yes.
clear. So let me end with a final question, which is sort of the perennial question that is asked about reservation. That we are, of course, trying to create a country that is based on unity and integrity and feels like one nation, and that I think there can be no two views about. And it has always been said, as in right from the time when Gandhiji had his debates with
Yeah.
Ambedkar, that that reservation cuts against the grain, that it
Mm.
stratifies, that it
Mm.
makes particular identities clear when what we should be looking at is trying to dissolve those identities into a larger identity of an Indian.
Yeah.
So, in that context of a larger project of nation building, and not a party political
Yeah. Yeah.
project, nation building, but a larger national project, how do you see reservations and the future of reservations? Is it a reality that we live with? Is it a reality that we embrace because of bringing people up to a level playing field? Or is it a reality that we best didn't have?
So for me, the identity of India was never a monolithic one identity. It was always India, which there was continuity and there was unity. So we have places like the Hindi heartland, we have the Northeast. When I go south, it's completely different. I mean, and equal when you go to Gujarat. I would say that all these places historically have also been defined with by the trades, by the professions, by the people who occupied these areas, right? So at the moment, at least I would say yes, caste is a reality. It is synonymous with class. Class itself is changing its definition, its dynamics. I would not say that people are still as marginalized, but that the appetite for, covering that distance fast. I want to reach there. I am as well as you. I mean, I am as good as you, but I need that reservation to reach where you've occupied my position by just being born in a certain caste is a reality. And when we talk of caste census, then the caste census is something which is just not going to ask me my caste. It is also going to ask me my economic status, how much land I own, whether I own a four-wheeler. That's a part of the entire
That's
census.
right.
So why not put it into place? Why, I would say, why do I want to hide? If I am better off economically, then it should be out in the open. And then the
Right.
other person gets the legitimacy that I do need that reservation. And the sad part is that the constitution is giving us the reservation, so we need to take a decision. We can't just, undermine it, mine it by, taking out or employing people of a particular caste. This sounds political, but it is true in UP that if you are, apart from UPSC or let's say the state services, the other places where people are employed is the universities, the government universities. So you just can't have that skewed sort of release of positions where a particular caste or a dominant caste or a caste who has been academically inclined naturally gets the advantage, right? So because that's very what you said, that when Gandhi said there has to be a communication. You can't just throw away aspirations of one person by my way of saying that you don't need it. If that person feels, then you have to address that.
That's right.
So that could be an idea of India which will probably take us forward. Yeah.
I think that's a good note and positive note to
Yes.
end on, that India has never been about single identities.
Yes.
We can coexist with our multiple identities across people and also within people, that we
Yes.
are not just Hindu or Hindi speaking or Bengali speaking man or woman. We are all of these things and together and rolled into one. And I think that is a real optimistic note to end on. And reservations is a reality, and it is a reality that we must embrace because both caste and class are realities in India. So thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Juhie, for this conversation. It was a real pleasure.
Time for Free and Fair, our special audience poll where, as the listener, you get to exercise your franchise. Our question for today: is it time for India to end caste based reservations? Vote yes or no. And to cast your vote, visit my Twitter account at the rate Orgo_justify. You have 48 hours. Adjourn.
If you enjoyed listening to this podcast, follow us on Twitter at Vidhi_India for regular updates. We are on SoundCloud and Spotify as Vidhi Center for Legal Policies podcast. You can also listen to us on Google Podcasts or iTunes. Email us at justify@vidhilegalpolicy.in to share your comments and feedback on this episode.